ways of being and made the world that worked for me. I took my strange ways of being and made the world I couldn't get enough. I made a universe. Don't know who might be watching me. Step back round high. Conversations in my mind. I put my fears aside. I took my strange ways of being and made the world that worked for me. I took my strange ways of being and made the world that worked for me. I took my strange ways of being and made the world that worked for me. I took my strange ways of being and made the world I couldn't get enough. I made a universe. I couldn't get enough.
It's so easy. It's so easy. It's too easy, man. They make it too easy. It's like they study, you know. It's like they bare their teeth, but they want to just like consume it or something. It's not even there. You can see out, but no one can see in.
I couldn't get enough. I couldn't get enough. My family tree been on the run, chased by vampires raised on a block. My roots been tossed into the wind, can never go back home again. In my mind, in my heart, I believe that everything I am and everything that I'll be is the wildest fantasy. Can we live forever? Make water in the desert. Our love we can rekindle. My body is a symbol. My body is a symbol. My tree built all these ships and guns. Nightmares teach more than dreaming does. And I know that I won't look away. My soul, it goes there every day. In my mind, in my heart, I believe that everything I am and everything that I'll be.
Welcome, welcome. Welcome to the people here in Detroit, and welcome to the thousands of people watching us from other places. We're excited to see y'all and be with you today. This is Designing for Transformation in the 21st Century. It's about to be lit. Get your notebooks out. My name is Adrienne Marie Brown, and we're going to be talking about Emergent Strategy, and I'm here with my co-host, Sage Crump, the architect of Emergent Strategy Ideation Institute, and Mia Herndon, the mason of Emergent Strategy Ideation Institute, and the healer in residence, and the cultural strategist in residence, and I'm the writer in residence. And we love giving ourselves names and titles, and you should totally practice that too. Before we jump into content, we really wanted to do the land acknowledgement for this space and this conference. So I'm going to read that, share that with you now. The AMC is produced on stolen indigenous land named Wawiyatanong by the Anishinaabe. This land is currently governed by the 1807 Treaty of Detroit between the United States and the Odawa, Ojibwe, Wyandot, and Potawatomi nations. We honor their past, present, and future stewardship of these lands and waters, and stand in solidarity with Native people throughout the Anishinaabe and Wyandot diasporas and across Turtle Island. Detroit is a community of indigenous people from many nations, refugees and immigrants, people brought by enslavement and the terror of Jim Crow, settlers and the descendants of settlers, and combinations of all of the above. Once known by the code name Midnight as the last stop on the Underground Railroad, we honor Detroit as the largest majority Black city in the United States with a long history of African diasporic contributions. Detroit is also the U.S. city with the largest concentration of Arab Americans, a border city with historic and growing Latinx communities, and is influenced by the rich contributions of Asian American communities and movements. We're grateful to all. We also wanted to take a moment before we started to acknowledge some hard times, some hard things that have been going on, and we're going to take a moment of silence. We want a moment of silence to honor the death of Jayland Walker, who was killed by the police in Akron, Ohio. Our folks are turning up and organizing around that right now. We also want to honor all of us who are terrified and impacted by the Supreme Court's last week of going wild with their power. Just land in this, take a moment. We send our love, we send our prayers, we send our action. Yeah? This is why we fight. So, all these folks on the stage right now are part of the solution to everything we're fighting right now. And we're gonna give you a little guideline, little framework on like, what is this conversation? What does it mean to design for the 21st century? So, it's been 5 years since the book Emergent Strategy came out. We're 5 years old. It's so cute. Who doesn't like a 5-year-old? I mean, they're so cute. They're so curious. Emergent Strategy is a text which intends to remind us of our place in the design of our existence, our unique labor in shaping an ever-changing world, our responsibility for stewardship of a sacred planet, our needed humility in the face of our great teachers from every species, in every texture, in every crisis, in every cellular arrangement. It's a book about recentering the miraculous wow of the human experience to guide us beyond the chaos of our most annihilatory thinking and behavior. We believe it's not too late to earn our place here, and that these people on the stage today are some of the most incredible thinkers and practitioners for the wow designs for human existence in movement and the whole species today. No pressure. I'm gonna read some bios to you because we want you to know who they are on the front end, and then I'll tell you how we're structuring this conversation to get the maximum amount of brilliance out of every single brain and body. We're gonna start with Makani Themba. How fine is Makani? How brilliant. Makani is the chief strategist at Higher Ground Change Strategies, based in Jackson, Mississippi, South. An author, social justice innovator, and pioneer in the fields of change, communications, and community-led, justice-centered policy development, Makani has spent more than 30 years supporting organizations, coalitions, and philanthropic institutions in developing high-impact change initiatives. Higher Ground Change Strategies provides her an opportunity to bring her strong sense of history, organizing knowledge, and deft movement facilitation skills to support powerful vision-based change. I just want you to know, Makani is who everybody calls when they're like, what the fuck we gonna do now? Makani. And she always says, oh, honey, well, here's what I think. And that's what we're gonna hear today. Then we're gonna hear from Lin Yee Yuan. Hi, Lin Yee, gorgeous in yellow. Lin Yee is the founder and editor of Mold at thisismold.com, a critically acclaimed print and online magazine about designing the future of food. Through original reporting, Mold explores how designers can address the coming food crisis by creating products and systems that will help feed 9 billion people by the year 2050. Y'all like to eat? I like to eat. In addition to the website and a self-published print magazine, Mold hosts events and exhibitions, works with next-generation food and lifestyle brands, and commissions products from emerging designers. She's an adjunct professor at Parsons, the New School, and was previously the entrepreneur in residence for QZ.com. Mia and I also went to school with Lin Yee. We think she's cool forever. Also, that's Lin Yee. Okay, Aisha Shillingford, gorgeous in green. You're like, what you gonna say? Aisha is an Afro-diasporic, anti-disciplinary artist, designer and cultural strategist from Trinidad and Tobago, living in Brooklyn, New York. She's the artistic director of Intelligent Mischief, a creative studio and futures design lab that creates art, experiences, content, strategy, and community that unleashes Black imagination to shape the future. Her work and that of Intelligent Mischief is inspired by and seeks to world build beautiful futures swirling around Afro-Indigenous utopias, fugitivity, opacity, and marronage. And Aisha makes the most banging collages ever, and we're about to do a collaborative tarot deck. What? Yeah, it's revealed here. And then Maurice Mitchell, fly over here in the hat. Mo just got in, like landed, and came running over here because he was like, I couldn't be anywhere but right here, right now. Maurice, can I call you Mo here? Okay. Mo is a nationally recognized political strategist and visionary leader in the movement for Black lives. Raised by Caribbean working-class parents in New York, he began organizing as a teenager and never stopped. After working for several grassroots advocacy organizations in his home state, Maurice directed the New York State Civic Engagement Table. In the wake of the police murder of Mike Brown, he relocated to Ferguson and helped build the movement for Black lives. He went on to co-found and lead Blackbird, a movement anchor organization. Then in 2018, Maurice took the helm of the Working Families Party as its national director. He's also an amazing papa. Yes, and a musician. Ooh, maybe we can jam. Okay, so here's how we're gonna structure this. We are going to hear opening salvos from our 4 guests here. What are their thoughts on how we balance power and scale and design in this moment? Then we're gonna each do a mini interview with them, so we get a little deeper dive. Then they'll have a chance to be in some discussion with each other, and then we're just gonna finish strong with like the most banging wisdom you ever heard. That's the plan. Sound good? Sound like what you want? All right, beautiful. So Makani, would you start us off? What?
We're going to start with the trailer.
Oh, yes, we're gonna start off with the trailer from Makani. Okay.
Narrative power is not about any one narrative. It's an interconnected web of stories and ideas, rooted, reinforced, and replicated through structures and culture.
This work is about so much more than messaging. It's about shifting the way structures reproduce meaning on a mass scale.
Narrative power is the ability to root and cultivate story at scale, even in the face of opposition.
Gotta say, this work of building narrative power is a bit harder than I thought.
So that, which you saw, is a trailer for a larger project. And for me, when I think about these issues of scale and what it means to change, a big part of my work over the years has been about what some people would call narrative, what some folks would call communications, but really, like, how do we think what we think, know what we know, believe what we believe? And I was really frustrated with the ways in which folks would act like this was a battle of stories. Like, I'd tell a story, then the other people would tell a story, and somehow, if whoever told the best story, that's who wins. And it was like, that's not true. We have great stories. We're very compelling people. We're hilarious. We're funny. We're all these things. That all of that really didn't talk about the power that roots bad stories. And so, I just say this really quickly. When I was a kid, and I grew up in Harlem, and I remember we sang it one time, and I came home and told my mother. So there's this song we used to sing in school, and when you think about black kids in Harlem singing this song, it would be like, I'm gonna jump down, turn around, pick a bale of cotton, jump down, turn around, pick a bale a day, oh Lordy, pick a bale of cotton. Can you imagine that? Black people singing this song, right? And I came home all excited, telling my mom we had learned the song, and she's like, oh, nope. We're going to school. We are not going to be having kids singing this song. And I think that, among other lessons, was like how stories get rooted that are not because they're compelling, but because they have power behind them. And the difference between a powerful story and the power behind a story. And so, we struggle to make sure our stories are told not because they're not good stories, but because we have to pay more attention to figuring out how we uproot the systems and the structures that root the stories that are difficult. And that's why we're in this fight around what people call CRT, all these things, because they understand that. They understand that. So this project is really about helping us think about what are the strategies that we can do to uproot these terrible stories, and what are the systems and structures that hold that into place. So I'll stop there. Obviously, there's more.
Thank you, Makani. Thank you, Makani. I know how to work a microphone. Trust me. Lin Yee, would you take us into the next salvo?
Yes, thank you so much for having me here. And thank you, Makani, for introducing and launching this incredible project. You just spoke for 2 minutes and I was furiously taking notes over here because I am a storyteller. I have worked, first of all, I have to just say that I love magazines. I've worked my entire career making magazines, trying to make magazines. And over the last 8 years, I've been working on a magazine that's about design and the way that designers can engage in offering solutions at different scales for the coming food crisis. It's both online and in print. And, I don't have a lot of answers today, but I have a lot of questions because over the last 3 years, I've really been thinking, well, once our print magazine comes to a close, what does the future of our work look like? And our magazine work has quite a global audience, but I came to realize that the work that I personally wanted to engage with was to ask the questions that we were asking in our magazine to my neighbors directly, to the people who I walk past every day, who I interact with at the playground where I take my children every day, at the grocery stores. And so actually two weeks ago, we launched our newest project, which is called Field Meridians. And the idea is to engage our neighbors with the question of what does the future of food look like for our neighborhood, for Crown Heights? How can we unlock our imaginations together to actually build towards a more sovereign food landscape in our neighbors. And Mia is actually my neighbor, and Aisha is too. And so in thinking about how how to navigate this question, I've really been thinking about 3 questions, which I'm kind of going to throw out because, again, I don't have a lot of answers, but I have a lot of questions. And the first is, what are the tools to engage our community in a meaningful way? And one of the kind of foundational ideas is design acupuncture. The idea that we can create a design intervention that would act at a very specific point and then ripple across the system to affect the most change, to create some sort of equilibrium. The second piece of it is really about the question of what does it mean to actually live in a way that reflects the very entangled, more than human, interspecies reality that we live in. How do we create work and engage people's imaginations to recognize the importance of our interdependence, this kind of idea of like multi-sensory listening, full body listening. How do we even see the body as a geography that is not apart from our environments, but in constant dialogue that is actually the environment, a landscape in and of itself. And then the last question is really about scale, which is what we're talking about today. And I've been reading this book by a colleague of mine at Parsons named Jamer Hunt. I actually brought it today because I love to bring a book and do a show and tell, but it's called Not to Scale. And one of the things that he talks about that kind of really has been sticking into my head is the idea that because we live in an increasingly dematerialized world, and one that is increasingly entangled, whether it's through kind of the way that we communicate with one another, the way that our systems, our food system for sure, increasingly globalized. Scale is something that's really hard to wrap your head around. It's unruly. It is shape-shifting. One of the examples he gives is that, when a caterpillar turns into a butterfly, in that in-between time, when you open up the chrysalis, it's not like an in-between caterpillar or butterfly. It's actually just a mess of intelligent goo. And I feel like we're in this kind of shape-shifting moment that we are an intelligent goo. We are all kind of moving towards something that is unruly, really undefinable, very much unmeasurable. And so as organizers who might be working at specific scales, like what are the tools that we have to make sense of the goo? Like we don't necessarily need to structure the goo because we know that we're moving towards something, but how do we navigate the goo? So this is kind of my big question. Please, someone will have answers, I hope.
I'm so excited to be goo with you. Oh, what a nice feeling. Aisha.
I have a video also.
Yes.
My name is Aisha Shillingford, and I was born and raised on the island of Trinidad, 7 miles off the coast of South America. The indigenous Kalinago and Warao named our island Kairi, meaning the island, since it was the first large island they encountered as they journeyed by boat from the mainland up the Caribbean archipelago to the Florida Peninsula. I was raised in Trinidad by my mother, who's a creative, a theater producer, director, artist, and carnivalist, and by my stepfather, who's an economist, professor, Black Power activist, and revolutionary, the first in his family to finish elementary school. After migrating to the US in 1999 for college and spending about 20 years as a community organizer, network weaver, and movement builder, I answered a deep and undeniable calling to center art making, futures design, and cultural strategy as my movement building practices. I made this leap towards my purpose because of everything that has happened between 2014 and now. I made this leap because I believe that we are in the throes of a great transition. The kind that happens when empires fall and worldviews shift. The kind that happens when an old will is dying and a new one is fighting to be born. In 2019, my closest friend went to visit a shaman in Arizona who speaks with White Cloud, the great ancestor. She was told that the year 2020 would be one in which there would be a great battle. Not a battle that would be fought in the physical realm, but rather a battle for the meaning of the world. She was informed that this battle would occur because the other living beings had reached the end of their tolerance with the devastating impact of humanity as a whole on the planet. In 2020, the pandemic and racial reckoning came, and a great existentialism was unleashed. I believe that people everywhere are searching for meaning and for a vision of the future and how to navigate towards it. It's only fitting then that Emergent Strategy was released to the world 5 years ago to seed and spore a vast network of people capable of helping humanity navigate the unknowns that were to come. In order to navigate the transition, we need to both have a vision of where we're going and the kind of power we need to get there. As a young organizer, I learned that power is the ability to get things done or the ability to change the state of something. And that power with or collective power was what we possessed as communities facing an apparently irresistible dominant power over. Later, as a movement builder, I learned about the intersection of economic, political, and cultural power as the core forms of power that underpin society, and the forms of power we strive to build in order to shape a society that is more just, more sustainable, and more democratic. Lately, I've been thinking about transformative power, our ability to embody and build the worlds we so deeply desire, and to navigate through a transition with resilience. I think about a form of power that invites us to reconnect to a living, breathing, conscious planet, and a power that says that we can transform ourselves to transform the world. A power that is tied to something much bigger than this system. The power of memory that invites us to tap into our ancestral knowledge and to act on behalf of those yet to be born. A power that invites us to imagine boldly and wildly, to practice in our own lives with our communities what we have imagined, and then to co-create spaces that can be the testing ground for these practices at scale. At Intelligent Mischief, a creative studio and futures design lab that is the embodiment of the worldview and practices shared by myself and my partner Terry, we've been deeply envisioning a global archipelago of liberated zones where Black folks are thriving, joyful, sovereign, and free. A vast network that constitutes an alternative set of political and economic connections, where autonomous and interconnected communities are building freedom and embodying ancient, new forms of power. Something feels familiar about this. We've done this before. We remember maroon spaces, quilombos, freedmen towns, space to breathe and think and move and imagine some more. We remember connected movements across the diaspora. We remember our liberation being tied up in each other's. The power to create meaning, the power to nourish ourselves with food and with spirit, the power to govern ourselves through love as bell hooks invites, the power to dream, the power of opacity. We imagine these places where our collective power is used to create what we want and not just resist what we do not want. Not everyone needs to do this, but some of us always have. We know that in large part what lies between us and this vision is the power of imagination. So we have dedicated our practice to unleashing Black imagination and inviting us all to co-create a future worthy of our descendants. For now, we are experimenting with making art, experiences, and culture that is popular and accessible, and that makes this vision familiar, irresistible, real, palpable, and yes, possible. We invite folks to ask themselves what if and why not, and dance with dangerously juicy ideas. But most of all, we continue to follow our calling, to make ourselves whole and to increase the space we have for really, truly living.
Ooh-wee. So long. Thank you, Lo. And Mo, will you bring us home?
I'll try. So I'm just going to build on what I've heard. So we talked about story and narrative, creating meaning in the goo, a radical vision of how we might govern ourselves. When I think about the through line that connects my story to the work that I'm doing now, I realize that it's hard for me to disaggregate my story from the story of my ancestors. And so I often start with my grandmother, who immigrated to this country from Trinidad and Tobago to be a domestic worker in the late 60s. And my story and my life feels like very much a continuation of her life. And if I had to understand why it is I do what I do, I think it has everything to do with what I witnessed as a child. People like my grandmother, my mom, my dad, my many uncles and aunts, and how navigating race, class, gender, immigration status, how it has real and not theoretical, but very material implications on the ability for a people, a person, or a community to realize joy in the limited maybe 8, maybe 9 decades that we have on this life, on this planet. And I think a desire built in me very early to try to understand why that was, and also try to form correctives, which led to me leading this life of an organizer, as a youth organizer, as a campus organizer at Howard University, as a community-based organizer in New York on the hyper local level, and then eventually on the statewide level, as a movement organizer in the movement for Black Lives. And now as somebody who's leading a political party. And I think the through line there for me is seeking to answer the same question and putting on different modes, tactics, strategies in order to pursue basically the same question I've been pondering since I was a young person. And where I am today, I'm at a place where we talk about scale. I've experienced change on the hyper local community level. And I've been in the middle of a movement that has scaled to have international resonance. So I've seen scale from every scale you could imagine. And I'm thinking about scale in a different way. I do think that neoliberalism has us count a lot of shit, right? And I think unnecessarily, and place value on the highest number of beans we could count. And we often are sort of in a chase to do that, and instead of in a pursuit of meaning. And so I'm interested in how we scale, to take a word from your video, how do we scale imagination? How do we scale rigor? How are we scaling our ambition? I often think, as somebody who runs a political party, I often think about the ambition of Steve Miller and Steve Bannon, who were marginal to their movement just a few years ago, completely marginal voices to their movement. And they had scaled their ambition and their imagination to the point where they had organized themselves to convince themselves that they could achieve governing power at the highest levels. And then they did. One of the self-critiques I have of sometimes myself and certainly some of my comrades in movement is that we sometimes, I feel, have a posture as it relates to power that is ambivalent, right? It's like, there's a real question as to whether or not we want power at all. And when I think about people like my grandmother, people like my mom and my dad, we are power deprived. We are power starved. We, of all people, should be power hungry and be able to stand in that without shrinking from that. It's a different quality of power, right? It's not the extractive, oppressive type of colonial power that has us in a power-starved place, but it's power nonetheless. And so what does it look like if we could scale our ambition? And so for me, a political party does many things, but ultimately one of the jobs of a political party is to pursue this question of governing. And that's not the same as elections. So how do we govern ourselves, and what are the strategies that we take seriously and the rigorous sort of techniques and tactics that could lead to a governing agenda that allows us to be whole? That is, to me, what I hear when I hear all of these things, right? When we govern ourselves, we could pursue what's in the goo. We could tell our stories. And so hopefully that could be a beginning of the conversation.
Thank you. Yeah. So are y'all feeling anticipation about what's about to happen? So it's Grace Lee Boggs' birthday week, Octavia Butler's birthday month. Both of them taught us that conversation is one of the most radical ways we can learn together. So we structured this space to now be a set of conversations we're going to have, and the first one is going to be Makani and Sage.
Woo, woo. I get so excited to talk to Makani any given moment, but I'm chomping at the bit because I'm really excited about the way you are moving us from just the ability to tell a story into something deeper, right? Into something, what does it mean? You are. And one of the things that we were really interested in this panel and thinking about, like this 21st century, right? We're in a new landscape, in a landscape that continues to evolve. And I wanted to ask you, in designing transformation for the 21st century, what should we be paying attention to now in relationship to narrative power?
You know, I love that question. You know, I think oftentimes we think of it as just storytelling and the way we think of it, like just tell a story and that person tells a story. But one of the things I become really fascinated with is how we play. Because there's so many things we learn from that. And, you know, there's this amazing movement called cooperative games. And, you know, it started in the 70s. My mom was actually a part of it. You know, she was, she worked at a friend's school, and, you know, they were trying to do that Quaker thing, which was, you know, a lot of awesomeness there. And the idea was to, you know, try to figure out how we create a generation of people who didn't feel like it was dog eat dog. Who wanted to care about each other, and so there was a whole set of folks who felt like school was a good place, because sadly church wasn't doing that. You know, and I'm a preacher's kid, no shade, but you know, it's not that. It's not that, right? And so just, you know, so this idea of what, I'll just say this very quickly about cooperative games is like, where they happen, people are transformed. And bullying stops. I mean, the data's there. So I feel like that is literally a narrative strategy and a transformation strategy that I'd love to see.
Play. Thank you so much for that. We got 10 minutes, so you can, you know, we're still here. So I'm curious, what does it look like for you in practice? Like, what kind of play helps you be in that space that you're describing?
I think one is being in my body. Being in our body is really important. You know, I'm a person in my 60s. I came of age in the 70s, where folks were just starting to feel that out, right? And I'm also one of the 3 people on this panel who have Caribbean parentage, right? And so
I know, I feel like that means something.
there's a
Trinidad,
thing, man.
that
There's a
means-
thing about like there's like dance, but there's also ways in which women's bodies are very constricted, right? And so for me, it's been a practice to move out of that and let that be a part of my work. You know, not being like the size that is supposedly the cute size, you know, whatever, and just embracing that. And I find that being in my body, the dance, the play, the laughter, the grief too, because it's not just, you know, people got joy, black joy, and it's like, yeah, black joy, and yeah, and sadness. I mean, I live in a place where some of my people in a weekend can lose 3 or 4 relatives in violence. And you know, we had an assembly yesterday where mamas were together talking about their people they lost, right? And so being in our bodies, the play, the willingness to feel, because I think this is how we're going to get through the goo. If we try to pretend like we can't feel, or we're not going to feel, or we don't figure out how to feel and feel all the feelings without freaking out, right? We're not going to make it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. You've got me thinking about the metabolism. Like when you were talking about dance and movement and play and our ability to not only embody but metabolize the world that we are currently living in, and what that means about in that process of metabolizing that, not running from any of it, allows us to understand more clearly what is the narrative power, right? Because it's not just what comes out of our mouths.
That's right.
That is a part of the narrative, right? Like, so I appreciate thinking about in this age, in this 21st century, like when we're talking about narrative power and where it can reside and how it is made clear and how it unentrenches oppression and systems. It is in our bodies, but through that we can learn and think about how we do it collectively, right? Does that?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think, too, that part of the disconnect with our bodies is about our disconnect with each other. And I've been thinking a lot, we've had 2 massacres of folks who are so-called illegal crossing so-called borders. And you think, people have migrated the entire history of humanity, right? And that it's never going to stop. But this idea of us not understanding the ways we are interconnected, you to interspecies, all the things, right? But I mean, even you can't even be on the same species team. People are like, we're not even on the same species team, and that I feel like that is the big part of the narrative work for us to do is helping us reconnect, understand that we are interconnected because of the ways in which people use fear to interrupt our natural connection and ways of being and the way our brains work. And then when you don't feel that sense of being afraid of and you feel so fragile, then we can engage each other differently. And that is a big part of the narrative work, which is bigger than story. It's so many things. It's like how, one of the most important interventions we could do for narrative right now in terms of what people think and believe is meditate. Because literally, if you meditate 30 minutes or more a day, you actually change the part of your brain that sees the other. You actually change a part of your brain where you actually know and tap into your connection to the universe, and that changes everything.
Y'all see why I could talk to Makani all day, right? There are other people here, but I love that you ended on universe, because when Maurice, when you were talking about scale, I was like, ooh, next scale is interstellar. And so I'm gonna pass, so I'm gonna have you and pass to you and Adrienne to be in y'all's conversation.
I know, I was like, intergalactic planet. I was like, come on, Mo, we can keep going bigger. So, hey, friend.
Hey.
Hey, comrade. I really love your brain. And one of the things I want to hear you talk about a little bit, because before you came to be the head of the Working Families Party, one of my favorite aspects of your brain was how you were constantly trying to think about designing delicious invitations into movement. So I want to hear you talk just a little bit about, what do you think about when you're like, let's design a delicious invitation, let's get more people to want to enter the door. You've talked about the low bar to entry, but then once people get in, the high standards. Can you just riff on that?
Sure. And I think it might even be instructive to think about the opposition. Yeah. Because it is what it is, but sometimes we have a sharper understanding of the opposition than our own movement. And what's true about the opposition, so if you look at the Supreme Court rulings of the past few weeks, right? If you look at it, if you just take a slice of those 2 weeks, you won't understand at all how and why these things are happening. This is the tail end of a 50-year long arc struggle, right? That is coming, you know, the neoliberal era started in 1979, the year of my birth. 40 years of neoliberalism. 50 years of a very concerted effort by the Christian right, animated by capital, right? There's an alliance there, to mount this strategy that advantages capital, advantages the Christian right's theocratic agenda, and is revolutionary and very, very ideological. And they've captured a political party in order to achieve their end. And they have many different sites of struggle, including a very well-resourced cultural strategy, a mass movement, and a media apparatus. Talk about narrative, right? That didn't happen overnight. That was something that was built assiduously based on a very clear, rigorous plan, right? Yeah. And it's, I mean, you could read their documents. They talk openly about it. Yeah. So when I think of the mass sort of character of their work, one of the things that they did was they used white evangelical Christian churches as basically huge political education vehicles and huge training vehicles in order to build the cadre that would then build the mass movement to achieve the outcomes. So, you know, white evangelicals are 15% of the population. They vote at maybe 20-25%. How? Through rigorous political education to scale. So when I think about the invitation that's necessary, right, we can't start at scale. That's right? There's no shortcuts in organizing, right? And if you think you're making a shortcut, you will realize the downside eventually. Yeah. I feel like we could write books about that, right? Now, so just like you can't make bread without yeast, you can't build a mass movement that's durable without cadre. It's just impossible. You could achieve scale, but you'll achieve scale that will collapse in on itself. That's right. And collapse in on its contradictions if you don't build a serious cadre base to give the scale form. The right wing understood that and understands that. The right wing understands the value of ideology, and there's no shortcuts around that. They are revolutionaries, and they are visionary. And the Koch brothers, why do they give so much of their fortune to this movement? Because they deeply believe in the revolutionary vision of the right wing. And they want this vision of property supremacy and their vision of liberation, which is the freedom for them to do whatever they want to do with their money. Right. They deeply believe in that. And so now, to answer the question about what we do, we need to make the yeast, and I'm now in the area of an analogy that I know maybe like 10% about, but I'm sure some of you
I know how to bake some bread.
might bake, right? And a good batch of yeast is really important. You can't skip on that. And so I think this is a moment of yeast making for our movement, right? We tried to kind of build the biggest loaf of bread possible, and it ended up tasting nasty. And so
Yeah. Well, and I love this, part of what you're getting at. I get frustrated sometimes when I hear people talk about emergent strategy, because I think they're like, small is all, just stay small. And I'm like, no. Everything large is made up of the small. So we have to focus on the small and get really good. And our small connections need to be really strong, and our yeast needs to be really good. And baking bread is humble work, right? Gardening is humble work. Tending to the soil is humble work. And cadre is humble work, right? It's showing up over and over and over again, sometimes to hear the same thing over and over and over again. And there's something about belonging that makes you come back, to the garden, to the bread, to the community, to service, to cadre, to scholarship. And I feel like part of why you went to Working Families Party, was that you have a sense of what belonging is possible in a political party framework, or at least you have an experimental hypothesis that I want to hear you riff on, because I want to know what structures and forms we need to be in for this next phase of movement building.
Yes. So at the end of the day, all of our systems are human systems, right? There's no way around it. However, sometimes in an effort to achieve scale or impact, we build containers that don't have at their center our humanity. And then we wonder why people don't show up. We're like, they ain't ready for the revolution. It's like, no,
they hungry.
people are hungry for connection,
Yes.
meaning, belonging, or actually just hungry.
Literal food.
Just literally hungry. And so if you don't place culture at the center of everything you do, right, which is the stories you tell, the food you cook, how you welcome people, how you invite people, the songs you sing. If that isn't at the root of the containers you build, then you're building containers that are bereft of humanity. And when you look at the mega churches, if you've ever been to a mega church, it is, I feel seen. I feel embraced, and there is an awareness of the initiate. So when somebody newly shows up at a mega church or a dojo, right, there is an awareness collectively that we embrace this person, that we expect this person to be not of our culture because they're coming in for the first time, and it is our job to acculturate them to our culture. It is our job when they create cultural faux pas that we lean in with compassion, right? In my martial arts practice, whenever there's a new person, we don't judge them for not knowing how to kick. It would be kind of wild, right? We lean in and we have patience with them, and we make sure that they come back, and that their experience there is an experience of deep connection. Like, one of the things that I've been thinking about lately is, and I forget exactly how I first started thinking about this, but ultimately the spiritual is all about connection, right? And the political is all about connection. And the emotional work that we do ultimately is all about connection. So then why, when we build political spaces or we work on organizing campaigns, do we just focus on metrics and not connection? And so to me, if we want to achieve the scale that we must achieve, because I care very deeply about scale, I want to win, right? I'm not interested in the small and beautiful. I want to build powerful vehicles in order to defeat the right-wing, white supremacists, and organized capital. And that's not anything we should play around with. We need to win, but in order to win, we actually need to wrestle with this question of connection, meaning, and belonging, which is like the most human connection. The right wing understands that, and we're in a moment of where people are feeling very physically and economically insecure. And so they're able to tell a story, this right-wing populism, that meets people where they're at and gives people an understanding of, gives a critique of neoliberalism, which the Democratic Party is unable to do, and then tells people a story about their security and how they can be secure. And we need to tell a story that's actually based in truth, that could explain why this system breeds insecurity and how we may be secure with one another.
I love this. And there's just one more thing I want to ask you about inside of this. We have a friend, Gopal Dayanini, who teaches us from Movement Generation about the individual is actually not the smallest thing, it's the connection, right? We're always in connection, and what we practice then becomes very important, right? So we have talked about this many times, watching our movements practice turning each other away at the door, watching our movements toss each other out of the door, watching our movements make it so embarrassing and shameful to be in it that no one wants to stay. And it's one thing to talk about, okay, we need to change that, right? We're rooting into the truth, we're rooting into the earth, we're rooting into our ancestors. But what do we practice at a human-to-human level when people are coming in and being transphobic, homophobic, saying stuff that's really offensive, saying stuff that's really regressive, or coming in from spaces we're like, what do you mean you're an ex-cop, or you're what does the practice look like at that scale?
Sure, so I am a trained organizer, right? And so I can't tell you the tens of thousands of one-on-one conversations I've had, the hundreds of thousands of door knocks that I've engaged in. So you develop a practice of meeting people exactly where they are in their condition. And that practice builds a capacity for compassion for the human condition in whatever condition you might find it in. So I think number one, that's not everybody's ministry, I have to say. So everybody actually doesn't need to do that work. However, if you choose to do that work, there is, I think, a self-practice that you need to engage with because you're constantly absorbing people where they're at. But when you meet people where they're at, it's not to give a pass for all of their behavior and all of their beliefs and all of their ideas and be liberal, not at all. But it's to understand that the only way you could walk with somebody, the only way you could influence somebody is to be inside of a relationship. So you actually have to do the work to cultivate that relationship so that you could walk with somebody and struggle with somebody. And that requires you to put aside the idea that you possess correct views that you are disseminating towards other people who have incorrect views. You actually need to soften so that you could be in right relationship with somebody. And then when you're in right relationship with somebody, you could have conversations where you could challenge them, they could challenge you. And organizing also isn't about that individual relationship, right? Organizing is about creating a collective relationship where the space is challenging itself. And I think that base level of connection, that base level of mutual respect allows people to be willing to be challenged by somebody. and allow somebody to say like, hey, I don't actually understand all this stuff that you're talking about, but you know what I do know? I respect you. And if what you're telling me is that out of respect for you and out of respect for this space, you want me to show up in this different way, I will do that. That can't happen outside of relationship. And so what often happens is we end up in this doom loop where we're shouting our correct thoughts louder and louder at incorrect people, and doing the opposite of organizing, actually cutting ourselves off from that connection.
Whew. You heard? All right. We're going to go over now to Mia and Lin Yee.
All right.
My hand hurts from taking notes, so I'm really glad that we have this opportunity to just talk, Mia.
I know. I'm excited too. And in particular, I'm sitting with like this thread that Maurice is pulling about the nature of relationship and how important that is for designing and for moving towards the future that we want to have that's practiced right now. And you are someone who studies designers. You've studied industrial design and then like, nice swag and now like food design. And so I'm wondering to you, and you've like seen how people approach this way of building that considers the people and then maybe ways in which it doesn't consider the people.
That's right.
And so I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about what does it mean and how do we design irresistible futures?
Well, I think that there's an old school way of designing, which is about designing for someone, where you are a designer with a D and you kind of create a template or a palette that then is put onto another human usually. And I think that's a really old school way of thinking about design, because industrial design comes from this idea that every body starts with a kind of foundational body type that is based on a 20-year-old white male who's in the army. So the scale of which desks, the chairs that you're sitting on, the height of a desk, the height of a counter, that's all based on a 20-year-old male from like the 50s and like their average quote unquote body size and type. I think that design, especially industrial design, is moving into a space that, and hopefully moving through a space that really embraces this idea of designing with and creating systems that engage the people who are actually going to be using the design in the design about what they want to see. It's about engaging the imagination and creating what I think should be a scaffolding, potentially a kit of parts that people can then build their own futures. And I think that that's the approach that is going to create a most resilient, the most resilient designs. Because if we know anything, is that we are living in a time of great complexity and great uncertainty. And the work that we need to do now, especially with thinking about designing for the built environment, which means architecture, the physical objects that we live with, is to think about the materiality of the world not as one that should last for thousands of years, but should answer a question in the moment. And that kind of flexibility, resiliency, materiality is kind of the work that is ahead of us. So I think that a lot of designers are also asking the question of what is the role of design? If we are living in an increasingly dematerialized world where all of the tools of the physical world all of a sudden kind of live in the palm of your cell phone, then what is the role of design? And I think that what I am finding is that design should be doing more of the work that everyone in this room is doing, which is about facilitating, which is about organizing. It's about, designers are professionally trained to think and work in interdisciplinary ways or anti-disciplinary ways, which I'm learning. And I think that they're trained to kind of frame out the right questions, whereas engineers might try to find the solution, the shortest solution from A to B. Designers are like, well, what is the question we're really asking? And I think that's the work that facilitators do. And yeah, that's the short version of that answer.
Love the short version of that. I got so excited. I was sitting here thinking about sandcastles.
Yes.
And about buildings that become ruins that then become reclaimed.
Yeah, or maybe the buildings of the future that we inhabit are actually growing with us. Mm-hmm. I mean, the material future that we can embrace is one that is an ancient future, I think. Mm-hmm. As everyone in this room probably recognizes, is that nature is our greatest teacher, and nature is not apart from all the things that are sitting in this room. And so the hope is that the future that we design really embraces this interdependence. I mean, us humans sitting in this room, we are actually physically made up more of non-human bacteria and cells than we are human cells. So if we were to really think about what it means to be human, it is actually, we are a complex entanglement of multi-species. And so when we come to that place, I agree with Mo that we, and Makani, we need to recognize that our existence it started from an act of interdependence between two bacteria that were let's dance. And now we're these walking, thinking, violent, things that are extracting things from the earth. And I think by embracing the idea that we are not, that we were porous, right? That we are constantly metabolizing. I really love that we talked about metabolizing, we talked about yeast. I mean, baking bread, anybody who's done any sort of fermentation know that that's a collaboration with unseen forces that when we talk about scale are really hard to define. How do you scale bread baking? And what kind of bread are you gonna make? And what does that bread taste like? And the hope is that the movements that we're building allow for every single person to make a decision about that. Maybe you're the yeast is not a singular strain, but it's wild yeast. So the yeast is coming from the air in your kitchen. It comes from, if you have a vagina, maybe the yeast in your vagina. There was this total random, sorry, but we're talking about, it is vagina bread. There is a sourdough lab, and they found that many of the people who have been tending these sourdough starters for years, they are actually in collaboration with the yeast in their bodies, often vaginal yeast. Just a little nod.
So much sense to me.
Of course.
I mean, we are impacted by the environment. We are impacted by what we eat. What we eat is impacted by what we eat.
Well, our vaginal yeast is not just in our vaginas. We live with it. It's our bodies. Our bodies have bacteria that are constantly in dialogue with other things in our environment.
I love that. Well, so I'm wondering if you can just talk for a bit about this relationship between the large and the small, and relationship to the projects that you get to see, and maybe even one where that's been talked about in mold, because I feel the way in which people are designing around food in a way that recognizes that we can contribute to its growth, we are part of it, and to create actually sustainable ways of farming or sustainable ways of dealing with our waste, is this relationship between large and small. So would you give an example of something that excites you?
Yeah, sure. I mean, when I first started doing this work, there was a lot of excitement around like large-scale hydroponic salad farms, basically, or these giant bioreactors that would create lab-grown or cultured meat. And this idea of scaling the technology for us to feed the future was very much the pitch that was kind of going out at the time. And I wrote about it a lot, and as I kind of continued thinking about it, I started asking questions. Well, who owns that technology? Who owns the means of production? What kind of meat are they growing? What kind of greens are they growing? Like, I'm Chinese American, first generation. I don't really eat salad, so that food future was not for me. And so these kind of ideas of scaling to feed the future weren't really speaking my language. And I realized that the future that I wanted to see was based in the soil. It was about cultivating this living material that is one of the most miraculous materials. In fact, this soil scientist talks about soil as the only material that can convert death to life. And so when we talk about the spirituality of the movement, I believe that grounding in the soil, cultivating a relationship with the soil is the very first place to start. And that's interesting because we, for the most part, all have access to soil and indigenous knowledge around how to be in relationship with that soil. But that starts from a very small scale. In fact, most of the food that we eat is actually cultivated on smallholder farm plots, which are typically small family-owned plots, but is then aggregated to scale within our global food system through large corporations, through all these different machinations. And these smallholder farmers really don't see the benefits of that. So how do we be more in relationship with our food? How do we be more in relationship with the labor, whether it's a farmer or a farm laborer or both, to support that work? I don't know what the answer is, but I think that it starts with everybody having some sort of, just asking the question like, where does this come from? Maybe you want to just try your hand at like growing something that means something to you. Maybe it's an herb or a plant that you grew up eating. I think just having a relationship with that type, and the understanding that our food is living, and that the soil that cultivated it should also be living, is a great starting place.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Wow. Wow. My goodness. Echoes of Sylvia Wynter. So many things is running through my body right now, right? Like, and I get to be in the final conversation with Aisha.
Yes.
Ooh. So, anyone who's been around me in the last year, I'm obsessed with power, like obsessed with the idea of power, right? Like obsessed with like, what does it mean? What does power mean in this moment? And in your opening salvo, you actually gave us not only a definition of power, but talked about it in 4 different ways, right? Social, economic, political, transformative. And I want to ask you a question about what are the building blocks of an irresistible future with those at its nexus, right? Like, what are we thinking about with those at its nexus?
Yeah, thank you. And before I speak, I think I want to bring in this one ancestor that is, I've been told, is my guide, Audrey Jeffers. And then I want to mention now some teachers, Norma Wong and Ed Whitfield, who basically everything I say is going to be based off of what they've taught me or I've read of them, in case I forget later. When I think about what's at the nexus of that and the idea of building irresistible futures, for us it's about worldview. We think about, a dominant worldview that we live in right now is one that's based largely on domination, extraction, and violence. I'm trying not to be binary about it, meaning that we all have access to a spectrum of worldviews, so from domination to interdependence, from extraction to regeneration, from violence to love, and probably our people in society sort of situate their activated or practiced worldview somewhere on those spectrums. So we think about worldview and the power to shape worldview, and how do we inspire practices, behaviors, relationships, and systems and structures that are based more towards the love, regeneration, and interdependence worldview, which we might call an indigenous worldview. And in my experience, tends to be a pan-indigenous worldview, so that many indigenous communities have practiced and practice and build systems based on love, regeneration, and interdependence, and the concurrent assumptions about who we are as humanity, what's our relationship to things, beings that are seen and unseen, the planet, what's our understanding of what's bigger than us, our understanding of cycles of life and death and so on. So those kind of like myth level ideas about our existence. And when we look at systems and sort of root back, we understand that almost all of the decisions that we make and the systems that we participate in are based on some really root level worldviews. In college, I had the opportunity, let's say, to study like a range of philosophical approaches, and was really struck by either, I can't remember if it's like, I think it's Hobbes, who says like his philosophy was that life is nasty, brutish, and short. And when I look at the sort of breakdown of our sort of political leanings, you can see that there's a real belief that life is nasty, brutish, and short as a worldview. And so our systems and behaviors have to be around protection, defense, putting a fence around our property, fending off our families, a well-trained militia, and things like that. So.
No, I really love that. Thank you so much. Because one of the things that's been sitting with me and listening to everyone is the way we think about time, right? Like, and how that impacts what gets designed, like how much time we have, like what do we have. I wanted, oh shoot, I almost lost my question for a second because I got so excited, right? Here it is. So again, I'm going to circle a little bit back to power, right? Because the way we frame it and the way you were just talking about it is it's the contestation for power, right? Like this idea of power building, and in the same way we interrogate this word like scale. How do we uncouple it from the worldview that it currently lives in, even within our movements? And where then do we reconnect with power in a way that is a worldview that honors us all and honors our relationship to the planet and all of the microbes that make us up? Right?
Yeah. Well, one thing I'll say, and you mentioned time, is that, so at Intelligent Mischief, we do a lot of long arc visioning. So we invite people to think about 100 years into the future. Part of that is we want to ground in the idea of 7 generations thinking, and that we ourselves are situated in a long arc. Like our movements didn't start 5 years ago. Humanity didn't begin existing 20 years ago. Like, we are in the middle of a long arc. 100 years is about a good range for us to actively imagine both backwards and forwards. And so what we'll do is sort of imagine backwards 100 years and think, who are the ancestors, benevolent ancestors that are doing pretty much the same work that we're trying to do right now, and what can we learn from them? And then who are the descendants 100 years from now that we want to envision on behalf of? And sort of as we sort of imagine that arc and think about how do we build a future world based on these worldviews? And one of the questions we do ask is, what does power look like in that future? And we invite an assumption. In our case, our assumption is that in this future world, because of the work that we've done that picks up from the work our ancestors have done, Black people are finally thriving, joyful, sovereign, and free. And I want to, at some point, talk about sovereignty as it pertains to life in this particular land. But, and so we invite people to sit with, what does power look like? And we also use 100 years, I'll say, because it allows people to sort of put aside like the very real oppressions and barriers. Like sometimes when we say, can you imagine 5 years from now, you just project forward all of the oppression that exists now, and you're not going to imagine that wildly. But when we say 100 years and you can imagine systems dying, then people start to say, oh, like power is shared. Or we ask like, who's governing? And people always say it's intergenerational. people go to young people and ask them, what should we do? Elders are sitting on councils making decisions based on their wisdom and things like that. And we do these sessions. I don't want to call them workshops because I'm trying to make sure that whatever they're named is very accessible to what we say, like regular degular people. Not people who see themselves as sitting inside of organizing necessarily. Yeah, people have these ideas that they want to share. They want to share power. They want to make decisions together. They want to collectively govern. They want to play. They want to dress up. They want to be cousins. They want to, eat as much watermelon as they want without judgment and things like that. Yeah.
Them's my people. Them's my people all day, every day. Red meat, yellow meat, you name it. Just wanted to have it. All claiming that. Oh, thank you so much for that. I love what you're saying, particularly around this 100 years, because I think that, and I've said this before and you've heard me say this, I think one of the things that systems right now do is when it makes us ahistorical and truncates our imagination, right? Mm-hmm. So how do we then, what it feels like you're offering is also a very grounded future, mm-hmm. right? It's not just we're just make up some shit and, the world is gonna be great, right? But can you talk about, because I know you have a very strong, the relationship between imagination and ideology. Mm-hmm.
Right? Well, I'm not sure if I'm going to answer the way you are hoping. But,
whatever you say is beautiful.
When I think about it, I'll tell the story. So I became an organizer in my early 20s. I was working in the Muslim community, sort of just doing community development, and the Muslim community it was in Boston, we had a huge conflict with another community around a mosque that we were building that was going to be the largest mosque on the Eastern Hemisphere and Northeast Coast, And another community in Boston was very concerned about what that meant for power of the Muslim community in that city with regards to Palestine and Israel and so on. So there became a series of defamation issues and lawsuits and so on. And we therefore had to sort of join with other people. And so we joined our local IAF, Industrial Areas Foundation affiliate. And in the course of that, a lot of us became trained as Alinsky-style organizers, including myself. I was really quickly told I'm not really an organizer by that person, and persisted to be an organizer for another 15 years anyway. But the whole point of saying that is that in the work that we're doing, we want to be and intend to be really grounded in what we see as the vision, values, demands, ideas, etc. of our movements. And our question is well, how do we inspire the imagination of, Lin Yee and I were talking, an outer tier of people who may not be reached by organizing efforts, but want the future that will come out of that organizing. So our question is, how do we translate either our core concepts, our vision, our values, our core texts, philosophies, etc., into plain language that inspires and catalyzes imagination of the average person. And part of what we were inspired by was people's reaction after Black Panther. We had formed a project called Wakanda Dream Lab to sort of do that bridging between a pop culture phenomenon and the political imaginations of people. And Makani participated, and Adrienne too, in some fan fiction anthologies that we created. And one thing we noticed in doing that work was that we ran a survey, and people on average attended that film 6 times. And so we were like, why did people go to a Disney Marvel movie 6 times? It was a great movie. We ourselves probably went 4 times, but then we bought the DVD, so we didn't have to keep going. And we realized the average person wants to immerse in that vision of Black life. They just want to be in that place. And we were like, wow, that's amazing. And why should Marvel and Disney be responsible for catalyzing the imagination of billions of people? And so that's what we want to do, is something that we learned from the Civic Imagination Project, which is at USC, which is engage large numbers of people in this imagining. We use world building as a tool for imagining because it's literally like building the world from the ground up, starting with values and cosmovision. And then we take those ideas and we're like, can we now turn those ideas into films, into books, into art, into immersive experiences, so that people can come and sit inside of each other's imagined futures and sort of use those spaces as a launch point for projects that they want to engage in. So, we do some prototyping too, so that people can say, like we imagined this like kind of fantasy governance structure, but I can actually really use that on my blog. I can actually really build this thing, create this structure, bring people together in this way, and so on.
As of course I knew, regardless of what my question was, you were going to drop all of the gems. Thank you so much, and thank you for everyone for the conversation. I think we're about to get into collective.
We are, and I'm adapting on the spot, given time. So I think we're really excited about the questions. You said, it's like I have more questions than answers, and I think we all are like that. We want to hear the questions you have for each other. So what we want to do is give each person a chance, pick one of the other of y'all, ask a question to that person. That person will get a chance, if you can have a one-line answer of that question, and then you ask a question to one of the other people, right? Until all four of you have gotten to go, and whoever's the last person, your question will go back to the first person who went, right? And I'll track it all. But that way we get a question, and if you don't have a one line, if you're like, that's a great question, and I can't answer that in one line, be honest and just go to the question part. We trust you to know. Whoever goes first will get to answer last, which some people like, so.
I'm gonna go first because I had a burning question. Maurice, I really want to know about I really just want to know, where is the cadre, because that belonging, that's something that I personally really crave, and trying to locate myself inside of movement, it's been a little bit of a struggle, and so I want that cadre, and I'm like, I hope you really have it, and even if you have to answer offline, I would like to be part of it.
I will answer offline, but I will say that we're taking that project of building, inside the Working Families Party, we're taking that project of building cadre, not just for us as a party, but experimenting with us so that we could inspire other experiments elsewhere in the movement very seriously. And in order to do it well and with rigor, it takes a lot of upfront investment in time, and so we're making those investments right now, and I could talk to you offline about what that looks like.
Awesome. So now you pick Lin Yee or Makani to ask a question to.
Okay, Lin Yee, so you talked about an industrial design that is, I guess for expediency or for other reasons, or because, hey, white supremacy and patriarchy is based on a 20-year-old white army dude from 1950. How can we practically design in a way that could hold all of our identities and all of our complexity? I guess there's a practicality of having a normative design, but then that leaves all these identities out. How do we practically design for the bigger we?
I'm really interested in thinking about using our material futures to design the connecting points. So, for example, if we were to build this chair together, perhaps the design that we're making is all the connectors for the chair. And whoever gets the connectors can decide, well, what do the legs look like? What is the back of the chair going to look like? What is the seat? And so that's the work that I'm interested in, and using materiality of the now and future that is regenerative and generative materials as opposed to extractive materials. I have a question for Makani. Makani, earlier you were talking about your new project of narrative power, about using narrative power to uproot systems. And conceptually, I understand what you're saying, but I'd like to hear an example of what that means.
Sure, and I want to say, I'll say really quickly, it's a symbiotic relationship. It's not like narrative by itself. But I think one example we have some memory of is what happened in the 60s. That it was sort of like a lot of different things came together that was about changing structures, like what you learned in school and how we dressed and what was considered freedom. And so there are lots of moving parts, but it's a thing that we could study. I mean, even churches were doing commercials for sharing, right? And people can remember that. Some people can remember that. So anyway, that's a short, that feels like a place of richness that we can learn from. And my question, actually, I'm going to break the rules, and I'm going to ask Sage a question. Because you know what? Because we need to do that, right? We got some of these folks.
I mean, we are going to get to talk.
I'm just saying, can I, or do I have to ask, to tell me what I need to do? I have questions for everybody, but you tell me.
If she asks you a question and then you'll ask Aisha, we'll make it work. I know, okay, let's do it, break it.
Okay, so, Sage, you have been doing this amazing dynamic work with cultural workers and artists. And I'm like, so why do you think that's the jam right now?
Well, I'm going to actually give you your own words back to you, okay? Because culture workers and artists, it's about how we believe what we believe. How we back to this world building, right? Like, what is it? So often we're in this conversation on what to believe, but I think what the conversation around culture, imagination, gets us more deeply into how do we believe what we believe? What is the transmission? What are the modes? It moves us into both grounding in our values and can also help us imagine strategies and practices from a place that is grounded in lived experience, in collaboration, in yeast with ideology, right? Like in a current context. So I think about those three things, and when I think about that nexus of ideology, lived experience, and the current conjuncture, there's no better form to be engaged in and wrestling with strategically for me than in the realm of culture and cultural transmission through art and culture production, expression.
Aren't you glad you heard that?
Oh.
It was a good rule break. I'm into it.
So since we're on this conversation about culture and artistic work, I don't want us to leave here and not be in a conversation with you about Aisha when, and I'm going to give your words back to you as well, in your salvo, you were like, make sure I might paraphrase, I unleashed my purpose and decided to focus on a creative artistic practice. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. I don't know, the story that I tell about it is that my dad was an economist and he shaped my thinking about what I should do in the world. Like, he was an organizer, economist, revolutionary, Black Power, etc. And he said, study this, do this. I worked for his consulting company and so on. And that's what I wanted to do, and that's what I did going into college and beyond. About 2014, I just felt like I want to make art. And the way I understand it is that the part of me that was shaped by my mom, she didn't shape it actively. She never sent me to art school. She never said, come play carnival, come do plays. She just took me to her plays. And I just felt like that part of me was missing, but I think it was just the part of me that was ready to like bring itself into like what it means to change the world. And so I just started, identifying as an artist, like really shy about it. And in the last time I ever worked for someone else, I felt like I was like spiritually dying. And no shade to them, it was just not the right way of being for me to be in the world.
I love that. No shade. You made me feel like I was dying, but it's not personal.
And I got a coach through that job, and the coach said we could talk about whatever you want to talk about. And I said, I want to talk about the fact that I want to be an artist. And she invited me to move through my fears and feelings around scarcity and so on by making art. And it was my first collage, and she invited me to like think about which ancestors were going to be there with me on the other side of this leap, and so on. And I just started doing that, did the artist's way, if anyone hasn't done it. It's really, really good, and it's really amazing. I think that reinforced the idea of like, oh, there's like some pan-Indigenous worldview where even the person who wrote the artist's way, the kind of, engaging with ancestors and inner self and intuition and meditation. There's so many other things that happened to just guide me towards art making, and yeah, I just started, and it kind of saved my life.
Thank you.
I have a question for Mia. So Mia, the first time we met was at the Emergent Strategy immersion in New York, and we had a closing ceremony where everyone was sort of saying really beautiful, powerful reflections, and I remember you went up there and you did a dance, and I can't forget that. And yeah, I just want to understand your relationship to embodiment, and I mean, that's how I'm framing it, because I just want to ask, like, why did you do that, and what does it mean to you to do that in that time, in that space?
Thank you. Bringing me to tears, too. Okay. Well, I sat in my chair, and I wrestled. I was like, do I have words for this moment? Let me see if I can put a couple words together. And my ancestors were at my back, and they kept saying, you need to move. The space needs movement, and, trust that. And so I was like, all right, I hear y'all, but maybe not, because that's what we do sometimes. And I got up, and they, it was, I was just a clear channel, and they took over. So that's basically what happened, is that I allowed myself to be a channel. I surrendered, and I believe that all the forces that needed to be present were, and that my words could not sum what needed movement. So thank you. And I struggle with it. Just like I don't call myself a healer, even though they say healer in residence, I call myself a facilitator of healing. I don't call myself a dancer, but I like to move. And I think for me, it feels important to recognize that there are forces we're in relationship to, and they have different ways they want to embody and express love. And if we can allow ourselves to do that, whether that's organizing, whether that's storytelling, whether it's collage, movement, then we kind of have a duty to do that.
We're going to close out singing together, y'all. I think that's the move. So our friend Michaela Harrison is a whale singer. She has been going and singing to the whales off the coast of Brazil, and they've been singing back to her. And the thing they keep telling her is, we are one. We are one. We are one. And as we're going through these struggles, it can feel easy to not feel like one. It's like, oh, that's happening to them over there, and something else is happening to them over there. But actually, it's an assault on every single human and all of our sovereignty and everything else that lives and feels, and the earth that holds us. And who knows, the aliens are probably offended too. So our friends Abigail and Sean Bingson created a song about sovereignty. For this moment, I'm going to ask you all to just sing it with me. I'll sing it, and it's easy, and you'll get it, and you'll just sing it with us. We will not be controlled. We are sovereign in our bodies. We are sovereign in our souls. We will not be controlled. We are sovereign in our bodies. We are sovereign in our souls. We will not be controlled. We are sovereign in our bodies. We are sovereign in our souls. Look at each other. We will not we will not be controlled. We are sovereign in our bodies. We are sovereign in our souls. We will not be controlled. We are sovereign in our bodies. We are sovereign in our souls. We love y'all.
My family tree been on the run, chased by vampires raised on a block. My roots been tossed into the wind, can never go back home again. In my mind, in my heart, I believe that everything I am and everything that I'll be is the wildest fantasy.